This rather, is CineBack Lite. It is a module that goes on the back of your camera that has a V-mount battery plate, a screen protector to keep your camera's display safe, and it has a power switch that'll send power from the battery to a single D-tap and dual 65-watt USB-C power delivery jacks, which can be used to power your camera as well as other accessories like monitors and more. It has a versatile cheese plate on one side, 15mm rods that can be mounted and adjusted in almost any orientation, multiple screen holders for different cameras so that you can safely add batteries without any damage to your screen from either side impact, rear or top, and giving you something to hold on to while filming. And it is universal thanks to multiple mounting positions, height adjustments, and multiple screen holders that are included with the kit. So whether you run FX3 or more of a traditional mirrorless or DSLR, all the way up to larger mirrorless or cinema style bodies. And in this video, we're going to talk about all of its features, how to get it set up, what kind of power options are available for your camera, how to build a base plate system for quick releases, and more. So check below this video for more information on timestamps, where to find different sections of the video, and let's go ahead and dive in. Now let's go over a brief anatomy of CineBack Lite. Let's begin with the V-mount battery plate, which is a super compact, shorter version of your traditional V-mount battery plate, and it's going to work with most small form factor batteries on the market. So when you install this, you'll notice that it is cut off at the top, so it's much shorter to make things even more compact. And when you go to insert your battery, you want to keep an eye on this part right here, and to make sure the battery is fully seated, you want to make sure it goes back toward the red release button. Like that. Now you know it's locked in place and you're good to go. To release the battery, simply press on the red button and the battery will pop out as you saw there. When it comes to controlling the flow of power, we have a power switch right here. When you flick this switch on, it's going to send power from the battery to the D-tap as well as both USB-C connections or jacks here on the side. The D-tap is going to have the exact same voltage as your battery, so make sure you understand how voltage works there, but it should be 14 to 16 volts, give or take. When it comes to the USB-C jacks, they can supply several different voltages as well as different current options, and when you turn it on, you will not see any lights. Only when you start supplying power to a device or drawing power from these jacks will you see the small blue LED lights light up just above each jack. Flipping things back around, we have the screen holder. There are multiple models included with CineBack Lite as well as replaceable pads, so you can customize how these are installed and how they work. There's 2 screws to install them. You're able to adjust them up and down, and there's 2 rows of threads built into the body, allowing you to mount this to really just about any camera at any height. Speaking of height, we have the 15mm rod clamp here at the bottom, which can be put really anywhere. You can put it here, you can mount it here, you can mount it on the other side, and that brings us to the cheese plate, which has a ton of mounting points, allowing you to add other gear in between CineBack Lite and your camera, like SSD docks that we have on our store. Or if you want to add HDMI to SDI adapters like this one, we can take our mount kit and install it there to add even more versatility. But you can really put anything back here. You could add audio devices, cable management solutions, just a lot of different options. When it comes to battery compatibility, most small form factor batteries are going to work just fine. You just need to make sure that the width of the battery is 75mm or less so that it doesn't interfere with your screen protector on CineBack Lite. Otherwise, you should be just fine. And we do also include an adapter that still protects your screen, but allows for larger batteries that are much wider and more traditional in size. But in general, CineBack Lite is really designed for more compact cinema setups where you don't want a humongous battery. If you want something a little larger, I'd recommend checking out the full-size CineBack models for your camera. Now let's go over what comes in the box if you pick up CineBack Lite. First, we have the CineBack Lite body and main module itself, which is ready to rock and roll, and it does not have the 15mm rods installed yet because there's multiple different ways to install that, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Aside from that 15mm rod clamp, we also have the hardware included to install it, as well as 2 black screws to install these 4 different screen holders. And there's multiple different sizes to cover pretty much any camera and any battery combination. A is going to probably be the most popular and work with just about any mirrorless or DSLR camera out there. So your FX3s, your A7Ss, your Fujifilms, all of that kind of stuff. Then we have the B size, which is slightly larger, and that's going to accommodate cameras like the Canon R5C. Then we have C, which is actually angled, and that is designed for smaller mirrorless cameras that actually are too small for a piece of gear like this, and we'll talk about how that works here in a little bit. Then there's the D size, which is chopped off and allows for much larger batteries. So if you don't want to use the common small form factor battery that a lot of us are used to these days, and you want to go with something a lot more monstrous, while this really probably isn't the most ideal setup for that, you could use a huge battery like this with such a small plate using this particular screen holder. The kit also comes with 4 foam pads, which can be installed on the screen holders and stacked if you need more space between the holder and your screen. And of course, we have a camera Foundry sticker and 2 Allen keys. So that is an overview of CineBack Lite. Now let's go ahead and talk about getting it set up with your camera, the different screen holder options, and more. The first thing we need to do is install the 15mm rod clamp onto CineBack Lite. The most common setup is going to be taking CineBack Lite and installing the rods right here. So you're going to use the 2 larger silver or black screws, send them through the rod clamp's face and into CineBack Lite like this. Tighten using the larger of the 2 Allen keys. And with that done, we can go ahead and install our camera onto whatever kind of a rig or base plate we're going to be using. If you're going with 15mm rods, we'll talk about this entire setup here in a second. And if you're intimidated by all this, don't worry, I'll walk you through it. But I'm going to go ahead and add a camera here, grab CineBack Lite, slide it onto the back of the rods, lock it in place, and now we're ready to add our screen holder on the side, which we'll do here in a moment. But first I want to talk about the different setups or configurations. So that's the first method, having the rod clamp installed on the back side of this plate. So here we have CineBack Lite and our rod clamp. Instead of putting it on the front, now I'm going to put it underneath, and we're going to use the 2 smaller silver screws to do this. So you can take your rod clamp, flip it, and add those 2 screws to the bottom. And we'll go ahead and insert those and run them into these threads right here. And now you can see we have a much taller setup. So we can go ahead and take our rig. I'll go ahead and install it, butt it up against the camera and snug it up. And now we can see that CineBack Lite is now flush with the top of the eyepiece. So this is another option you could go with when it comes to rigging this up. And just to give you an idea of what things look like with a 155 watt-hour battery, that's kind of what we got going with an A7S and CineBack Lite. Of course, we haven't added our screen holder yet, but that's one option. Now let's talk about the opposite, where instead of raising CineBack up, we're actually going to lower it. So here we have CineBack Lite again. Instead of adding our rod clamp here or here, we're actually going to flip the whole thing over and flip over our rod clamp and install it right here. This is going to lower the overall setup. The only downside to this is going to be that your rods will not pass through. So you won't have the ability to slide this where your rods extend beyond that point right there where it hits the cheese plate. So let me snug this up with our Allen key, and I'll go ahead and reinstall this on our rig. And as you can see, it sticks right to the end of the rods. So to adjust the position, I'm going to need to loosen the threads or the knobs on the actual base plate and snug this thing up. Now you can start to see we've lowered the entire setup, and CineBack Lite is now fitting really nicely into and underneath the camera's viewfinder. So we can then, of course, add our screen holder here in a little bit, but this gives you an idea of another compact setup. Let's go ahead and grab that same battery, or actually we'll go with the 99 watt hour on this one. And that's what you can kind of expect that to look like. So you're probably going to go with one of the first two setups, but I still wanted to show you how you can lower CineBack Lite if you need to. Last but not least, you don't have to use this with a camera at all. So here I have CineBack Lite and a clamp, and we are looking into clamp options that are going to hopefully be on the store soon. So you can check the product page to see what is available, but something that would work out of the box really well with CineBack Lite. So with this, I could simply add this to a light stand, lock it down, and then have all of my power options going to my actual light. Now all I have to do is throw on a battery, and now I'm able to quickly turn off and on whatever is coming out of the outputs and into light fixtures, or really any gear. You could mount this to monitors. All kinds of different options are available. So now let's get into all the different screen holder options available and that are included with CineBack Lite, and we'll go ahead and go over each one. Let's begin with the A size, which is going to be your most common size, and there are 2 slots for foam pads. So if you're not sure which screen holder you're going to be going with, definitely check each one of them before you install the pads, and then you can add them as you become more confident with which one's going to work best. Since we have a bunch of pads here, I'm going to go ahead and just pad up each one of these screen holders. I'm going to stick the pad in the slot once I remove the sticky backing, and we'll go ahead and line that up just like that. I'll grab our next one, do the same thing, remove the sticky back, and now install it in the front slot. So there's 2 slots per screen holder, like that. Next, with CineBack installed in however you want your configuration, we can go ahead and get our screen holder installed. So you're going to need to grab the 2 smaller black screws and the smallest Allen key to get this installed. And what we're going to do is simply place the screen holder right where the screen is on the camera, flip up the screen, and line up these 2 slots with the holes on CineBack Lite. Next, we can start tightening down these screws. I would warn you though, be careful when you're doing this that you don't use your Allen key to scratch your camera screen. So maybe go ahead and either remove the camera or just be careful. And when you first install these, they're going to be a little tight and nice and snug. And then before you fully tighten them down, you want to make sure they're still able to move, or you're able to slide the screen holder up and down. Gently close your screen and be careful because it might hit those 2 screws and we don't want to scratch your screen. But this will allow you to slide up and down until you find just the right spot, and we can finish tightening up the screws. And keep in mind, you don't have to go too tight. We just want this thing to bite down so it doesn't slide up and down. And now we can close the camera screen. Make sure it's hitting the foam pads and not the screws. If it is hitting the screws because of your particular setup, you could add 2 more or 1 more foam pad on top of this just to make sure it's nice and secure. But this one is good to go and ready to rock and roll, so we can go ahead and run and grab a battery like this one. Slot it in place. Now the cinema rig is ready to go out and get used and get everything cabled up. Next, let's go ahead and talk about the B size. So I'm going to remove this camera. We're going to grab the Canon R5C, which has a giant screen, and that is where the B size comes into place. And same thing, we're going to work on getting this aligned. I've already added the foam pads, and with that fully snugged up, we're ready to rock and roll with the Canon R5C, or cameras that have that larger size screen. So that takes care of that one. Now let's grab a battery, slap it on, and this is what things look like with the Canon R5C. Next, let's talk about the D size of screen holders. Okay, so here we have removed the side screen, and now we're going to take the D size, and you'll see that the back is flush or close to flush with the actual V-mount. So now we can add huge batteries and it won't interfere with our screen holder. All right, so now we can do a final adjustment with CineBack Lite if you need to snug it up or loosen it with the camera screen. Tighten it up, and now we are ready to rock and roll with larger batteries. So I can take this monstrous battery, which is going to look hilarious on this setup. I'll install it on CineBack Lite, and now that's what we're looking like for this setup. A little ridiculous. Let's go with a slightly less ridiculous, but still insane small rig 212. A little smaller, pretty powerful battery, and that's what that looks like. So not really what CineBack Lite is designed for. If you're doing something like this a lot, you probably should just look at the full-size CineBack for your camera, but this will work in a pinch using that D size. Or if you have a smaller battery that's just a little larger, you can still do something like that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the crazy C size. Okay, so here I have the CineBack Lite with the rod clamp on the front bottom of the unit, and here I have a base plate with a ZVE1. So this is going to show us why we came up with this crazy style, C style with an angle on this thing. So the screen is actually going to be resting at an angle, not flush. So it's going to be like that. And the reason for that is a lot of these mirrorless cameras are getting so small that the area or the angle or the hinge point of the screen is so much closer to the sensor. Whereas mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, it's further out here, giving us more room to stick stuff behind the camera. So let's just go ahead and demonstrate this. We'll throw on a CineBack Lite, butt it right up against the camera. I'll snug it up, and you'll be able to see that when I close the screen, pretty much without a screen holder at all, it's parallel and flush there. So there's not a lot of room to put anything. So what we're going to do is have this screen live kind of like that. That gives us more room to create a nice pocket with a nice strong screen holder with our foam pads. So let's go ahead and install the size C. I've already added the foam pads. We can grab our 2 screws and install it. Being careful not to scratch your camera screen because that would be bad. So don't do that, please. And now we can close the camera screen. And now we've got a really nice, super solid setup. We can use this thing as a handle. We can flip the screen around, close it, and it's just a great setup. Now on the ZVE1, I will warn you, that stinking USB-C blocks the screen from being opened. So you're going to have some difficulty if you're using power delivery on this. You'll need to tilt it, then plug in the screen over the top, or you could use a dummy battery to power this camera, which would be a lot easier. So let's go ahead and grab a battery. I think this one I'm gonna go with our adorable Anton Bauer 45 watt hour. And that is our setup. Super compact, really tiny, really handy. And then of course with that quick release that we talked about earlier, when you're done filming in kind of cinema mode, you can simply pull the camera off, go out and film, throw it on a gimbal, take some photos, bring it back, lock it back in place, and you're ready to go into cinema mode. So that is the C style screen holder for smaller cameras. This is going to be your ZVE1s. This is going to be potentially your A7C2s or cameras like the A6700 or whatever else comes out in the future that is super tiny. So now let's talk about powering your camera. There are 2 ways to do this. One is the good old-fashioned dummy battery, where you go from the D-tap connection and you plug in the dummy battery or battery coupler into the camera. I'll let you decide if that's a good solution for you. There's a lot of complaints with power issues. If you get this backward and plug in positive to negative and negative to positive, bad things can happen. I'm pretty comfortable with this, but just something you should decide for yourself. Alternatively, most cameras these days have power delivery capabilities where you insert an official battery into the camera, then supply USB-C power delivery to the camera's USB-C jack. To demo this, I'm going to use one of our camera Foundry cables. There's several lengths available on the store, and I'm going to insert one end through in between CineBack and the camera, plug the other into CineBack Lite. Then I'm going to flip the whole thing over. We'll grab our cable, pull it through, and plug it into the camera. In this case, a Sony FX3. At this point, we're pretty much ready to go. All we have to do is flip on the camera, or the CineBack rather, then turn on the camera, And now we can see on the other side we have power. So very straightforward setup, super simple, and what that's going to do is keep our camera charged up and give us a longer run time. You can also see right there we've got a blue light letting us know we have power going to the camera, and on the screen of the camera we have the little icon letting us know we have power delivery coming through. Now let's say we want to add a camera monitor and power it with CineBack Lite. The first thing you need to do is figure out what power requirements your device needs. So in this case, this monitor needs 12 volts. So we could go out and buy a D-tap connection that goes from 14.4 volts down to 12 volts, or we can use a super cool cable that will take advantage of our USB-C power delivery. So I'm going to grab one of these cables, which are super cool and we'll have linked to on the product page. And this thing goes from USB-C power delivery down to a DC voltage at 12 volts on a barrel here. There you can see it says 12 volts on the USB-C end, and we're going to be able to use this barrel connector with this monitor. So I'm going to plug this in to our remaining USB-C power delivery connector or jack on the side of CineBack Lite, and I'll plug in the monitor. I'll flip it up here and you should be able to see we now will get a orange light here, and I'll go ahead and turn the monitor on. You can see we've got an orange light. I'll tilt it down. We'll wait for it to power up. And now we have our monitor hooked up and ready to go. The entire setup is now powered off of two USB-C connections, which is amazing. And we still have our D-tap for other accessories, and we could get a splitter for that. Lots of options here. So that's a quick look at a couple different power options for CineBack Lite and getting things up and running with multiple different ways to power your devices. There are some other things you need to get CineBack to work. If you're going with a 15mm rod system, you will need some way to mount your camera to 15mm rods. Alternatively, you can just skip the rod clamp and use the cheese plate to mount this to a light stand or another camera rigging system that you've already implemented. But I want to go over a more common setup using 15mm base plate, 15mm rods, and a quick release. So this is going to be the most common setup in my opinion, or the most flexible. This will allow you to simply take your camera with whatever kind of quick release system you're going with, attach it like you see here, then you can take CineBack Lite and install it on the back of the 15mm rods. So I've broken down this particular rig into the three main components that we're talking about here. The first is going to be the base plate. This is how you're going to add your camera to 15mm rods. Now you could mount your camera directly onto this, but I recommend using a quick release, some way to quickly get your camera off of your base plate. But that's not necessary if you don't need to remove your camera. You could just install it right here. This comes with several different screws. This particular one is made by SmallRig. It is very affordable and a really nice piece of kit. So one I would recommend, but there are so many options out there. Here's a more beefy one from Nicey Rig with some rosettes built in, and you can get a riser plate. Here's another beefy generic one that you can find on Amazon and online. And finally, another dead simple one from SmallRig. Very, very straightforward, very affordable, and just a simple way to get your camera or quick release onto 15mm rods. Next are quick releases. I'm going to be mainly in this video talking about the Falcam small quick release system. This is the F38 system, and it's really handy, super quick and easy to use, but it's not gonna, hold the most weight potentially, and there's several different options out there. For example, here is one from SmallRig. Very simple side operation. You just drop your camera on top, lock it in place, and you're good to go. So you could mount this on top of your 15mm rod base. Here's another larger version where you can drop your plate in from the top, lock it in place, and then release it when you need to remove your camera. And this is probably the cheapest option out there. It's a dead simple quick release for Arca Swiss with just a knob. You just tighten it or loosen it. Nothing really to write home about here. Then of course we have the rods. You can go with something nice and short to keep your whole setup really compact, or go with something a little longer if you need to have rods over by your lens for a matte box or follow focus gear or something like that. Putting everything together is super simple. Take your base plate, add your quick release, With that done, we can go ahead and add our rods. So simply slot those in. I'm going to stick with shorter rods, and I'll start with something like that for now. Then you can simply add your rods to the setup, and now we're ready to go ahead and build with CineBack Lite. So that has been CineBack Lite. It really is one of the most versatile tools for keeping rigs nice and tidy, flexible, keeping your screen safe, and of course just having a really flexible rigging solution for really any production. So you can learn more about it at camerafoundry.com. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in our next product video.